Okay, I guess we'll start. We still have one panel member missing, so he's in a taxi and arriving maybe now. Anyway, hello. My name is Chris Frauenberger. I'm professor for human-computer interaction at ITU, and I have the privilege to moderate and host this fantastic panel. Thank you so much for joining me here on stage, discussing the use of LLMs in the future of education. The way we agreed to do this is that I sent all the panelists just one little question, which is very fuzzy and open-ended, and asked them to kind of prepare a very short 5-minute statement to that, and then we'll try to make this as interactive and open as possible. So we'll discuss what visions they have, and then also open up the floor, of course, for you to ask questions. And yes, so the one question that I asked the panelists to think about was, what could be desired roles of LLM or AI agents in the future of human learning? And I deliberately kind of chose the word human learning to kind of open up possibilities for you guys to think about. We'll hear about 5 minutes of statements, and I'll keep track of the time, because it's always dangerous to kind of give academics only 5 minutes, so they usually overrun. And then we'll have a discussion about that, and we'll open the floor. Michael, I want to start with you because you have not been on stage yet today. So Michael Strube is a researcher in NLP and computational linguistics. He's the group leader of the NLP group at the Heidelberg Institute of Theoretical Studies, HITS, and also honorary professor of computational linguistics at the Department of Computational Linguistics at Heidelberg University. I think that's as quick as I can get with that. Good. Michael, can we have your vision for LLM AI agents in the future of human learning, please?
Okay, thank you. I can try. I'd like to say first that I'm just a linguist, so I'm not really interested in LLMs and stuff. I'm interested in language, and I'm also not really qualified to talk about LLMs. I can't even pronounce it properly. I'd like to start with saying that I'm from Germany, as you might have heard. When ChatGPT got released, the news were full of statements that this is a terrible thing. Students should not be allowed to use it because they're going to cheat. So this was most of the news in the first days of ChatGPT. So students in high school, students at universities should not be allowed to use these new tools. And that's because most or many things at schools, universities are done via essays, and essays suddenly could be written by these tools. So we came up with restrictions, regulations. We heard this in Antoine's talk about regulations in the EU, but Germany is much worse than many of the other countries. This actually makes us more difficult for us to develop literacy in LLMs, because we are not really encouraged to use them. Of course, people do it now, but it's like not easy to get this into the classroom and the like. And because of this, we are also less competitive in developing LLMs. So we've seen that Switzerland is good at this by now. So congratulations, good job. For us, it's more difficult. What should we do in education? I think we have to teach high school students and students at colleges and universities how to use LLMs most effectively. I personally oppose the things I said before. So I view LLMs as a new medium, as a new media technology that will stay with us, and this may even shape our future. Right now, we are in the lucky position to observe and as NLP researchers, maybe even to shape our future, a new future or a paradigm shift. Of course, there's a lot of criticism, but whenever a new media technology arrives, there is criticism. There's even like statements by Plato in the 4th century before Christ that writing is a bad media technology because it's not good for memory. Same thing happened when the printing press arrived. Preslav showed it. When new paper was developed in the 18th century, suddenly there was a flood of bad novels, and people spoke against it. The TV arrived, bad thing, of course. The personal computer, now the internet, social media, whatever. It's always new stuff. It's criticized. Then we use it, and a couple of years later, it becomes the old stuff. So I argue for teaching this so that people can develop AI literacy. In the 2010s, Janet Wing from CMU, she was at CMU back then, came up with the term computational thinking. And I think now students should be taught computational thinking. And I think now students should be taught AI literacy. Okay, I think that's it.
You've got 1 minute to go, if you. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll go through the statements first and then open up the debate. Yulan, I would like to go to you next, jumping out a little bit. You've been introduced today already, so I'm not going to go through the whole list of affiliations again. But interesting and relevantly for this topic, you've done research on tutoring systems and assessment systems, which might be relevant for today's topic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Indeed, yes, thank you. So, when you email us, right, about this kind of potential panel topic, I think the first thing I'm actually trying to think about is if AI is everywhere, right? So AI basically can write report for us, can do the coding, then what's left for the human to learn, right? So basically, what kind of human skills we will still need, in the age of in the era of AI. And I was actually thinking that I think it's actually more than importantly, it is super important actually for humans still trying to develop the critical thinking capabilities. I think this is relating to Preslav's fact-checking things, right? Because all the information can be generated so easily. I guess for human, it's actually need to understand all the kind of context behind this information gathered, and then also to be able to ask the right questions, right? And then to be able to assess and then also evaluate the evidence, and before human can actually make any sensible decisions. So I guess the critical thinking skills will be still important for humans to develop it. And I guess another skill will be this creativity, right, or creative thinking. So that's something not easily to be replaced by AI. And I think this is also a social skills learning, right? So that's I think because we still need the human to collaborate with each other. So I guess this is also something humans still need to develop in terms of skill learning. And of course, there will be this so-called ethical reasoning as well, right? Because we need to ensure any technology developed for humans need to be safe, and then need to be also serve humanity, right? So but then I'm also excited to actually see with the AI and also with the advances in LLM agents, then what the future of learning look like. So I think the future of learning could be some kind of a combination of AI agents with actually virtual reality to create this totally different experience. In fact, a couple of years ago, my group actually created some kind of interactive reading app. We call it narrative play. So in this kind of platform, the stories can be actually transformed into some vivid and living picture books. And then readers or humans can actually role play one of the book characters, having conversations with other book characters. And in fact, human choices can actually reshape how the historical events unfold over time, right? So we call this immersive reading, but then you can imagine that it actually opens up a new way for humans to learn the social skills. So humans can be kind of exposed into some kind of a conflict, resolution sort of like a setting, right? And then to experience like life from different cultural perspective or background. And then that help them to actually develop understanding in this kind of a guided environment. And yes, I think like we have done lots of work on this kind of AI for education, and specifically the personalized kind of assessment feedback system. So we developed this kind of like AI agents to be able to kind of generate tailored responses for each individuals. But in fact, like I guess we are also like facing significant challenges here. So I guess I basically like briefly mention about this development of AI could have have this erosion of human critical thinking capabilities. But then what I want to talk about the specific like challenges here, basically that's associated with using AI for kind of a personal tutoring tools. So first, like kind of challenges we observe is that we can easily use the LLMs to generate quizzes, right? So you just put in any kind of a course content and then ask LLM to generate quizzes. You will be easy to get like tens, like hundreds, even hundreds like questions. But then our finding is that all these like quizzes generated by LLMs tend to be very superficial. And in fact, like those kind of questions like tend to be mostly sort of like memory recall type of questions. So I guess there's still like a long way to go to enable the LM to be able to generate something which probe like a human understanding in more sensible way. And the other challenge we are facing is the knowledge boundary is actually like poorly defined. So LM actually struggle to understand where the knowledge boundary is. I just like give you examples. So we basically use the LM to assess the GCSE level kind of exam student answers. But the LM actually like tend to give the feedback, mentioning the concepts which students should only learn during the A level. So essentially, like LM, has no sense of this kind of like a knowledge boundary. And I think like some other challenges, such as we think like LM still lack this we call it subject matter depth. So basically, like when using the LM as assessment tools, LM actually struggle to understand what's important, what's not less important in student answers. Do I still have the time?
Yeah, you're a little bit over already, so.
Yeah, okay. So I just like quickly want to talk about a bit of like opportunities. So I think first, like we want to so we see there's a gaps actually. So in terms of LM research, AI research. So first thing, like I think it's important to actually train the AI model to be able to generate some kind of what we call multi-step reasoning questions, right? So require humans to to perform this kind of more in-depth kind of reasoning in order to generate the answers rather than those kind of memory recall type of questions. The other thing is about this knowledge boundary problem. So in fact, like we have been thinking about whether we can make use of mechanistic interpretability stuff. So to understand how these LMs internally works, right, before they're generating the responses, and whether we can use these insights to actually do a bit of like the steering of the LM outputs, especially when facing these knowledge boundary issues. And then I think the other thing is, this is also like some kind of a topic one of my colleagues that King's interesting about, to get the LM to actually communicate uncertainty. Now, the uncertainty here, we don't refer to those quantifiable uncertainty, but instead we refer to those unquantifiable uncertainty. So we encourage AI to address uncertainty in some ways to actually invite multiple perspectives or stimulate deep thinking from humans.
Maybe
so that's all. Yeah.
Oh, I was trying to get your. So thank you very much. Min has joined us on the table. Glad you made it. Thank you very much. We'll give you some more minutes to brief. I'll jump to Antoine first and then. Antoine, there was already quite a lot of praise that Switzerland got it right. What's your vision?
Well, I guess one thing I would say about Michael's characterization is that another thing that's happening right now in Switzerland is there's a motion in front of Parliament to completely stop the ability to train on any copyrighted content, regardless of where it is sourced. Which, as I mentioned in my talk, the way republishing works is essentially a way to kill the entire AI industry in Switzerland. So sometimes we get it right, sometimes we're going in the wrong direction. But on to the actual question that you asked about human learning. I guess you mentioned at the beginning that you made its scope very broad. So I guess as I start my reflection, I'll narrow it quite a bit by saying that I'm a university professor, and that's generally the perspective I bring to human learning. But human learning is insanely broad, and so I think that motivates a bit of the perspective I take on it, which is that there's generally, I would divide it into two ways in which AI will, fundamentally transform learning. The first is how it kind of fundamentally transforms individual learning. And the second is the way in which it transforms educational systems as they're designed. That's where some of my own work has been done. We had this paper that looked at essentially how LLMs would affect the educational systems at EPFL, where across hundreds of courses on campus, we collected various assessment schemes, tested LLMs, and what we were really interested in wasn't necessarily how it does on particular questions, but fundamentally, what is the impact of students having this technology as we think about the design of our degree programs? Do we need to bring back in-person examinations, without any sort of open book or open access? Can we kind of keep, the same assignment and assessment schemes? How many class projects can we have? And the findings, were fairly interesting in terms of, whether the system itself was at risk of these tools circa mid-2023. Models have only gotten better since then, so it's not like any of this is, it's not like these models are staying at one level and anything that's predictable. We should just assume that the models are getting better and try to make predictions from there. The reason I kind of bring up the educational system is because a lot of the solutions that we imagine, for AI are kind of imagined in a way in how they fit into the system that we already know exists. As a university professor, the first thing that comes to mind when I think about how AI agents will impact learning, it's how do they fit into the system that I already have? And this can be things like AI question generation or automatic AI graders or automatic AI discussion board question answers. Essentially, how can I have an AI TA almost in a way of making the system that I already have more productive and better for the students as well. And this is, there's going to be a whole host of work, but I would say that all of these types of solutions are constrained, within thinking about the system that we already have. And the thing about systems is that they're generally very inert. There's lots of negative feedback loops that try to bring them back to the same state in general. And so many of the solutions we have won't fundamentally transform learning. They will just make it more productive so that we can educate more people, educate them better, and sort of incrementally keep improving the quality of learning that people have in these institutions. What I think is perhaps even more exciting as well is ways in which it can fundamentally transform learning. And the sad truth is that I'm probably the wrong person to be imagining about this because I'm so hyper-optimized to the system that I'm already in. And what I've noticed is that a lot of times it's the students that drive those solutions rather than the teachers themselves. And I, don't have, I think, any great ideas about how that will happen, but I will lead with two examples that I found particularly interesting over the last few years. The first was a survey that was sent out at our sister school, ETH Zurich, by their Center for Learning Sciences there, that asked students, how they use AI tools. And naturally, you found, kind of many of the same things. Oh, I use it to answer practice questions, things like that. But one of the things that they mentioned that we hadn't really thought about was that they really liked the AI systems because it was a private learning companion. And that privacy was kind of a key aspect. They like using AI systems to learn because AI systems don't judge them, which can be in contrast to various types of group work, to going to a professor, to working with other students, where you could sort of feel like, oh, if I say something silly, they're going to judge me for it. I'll lose social capital, whatever you want. AI systems don't have that issue. And so students are actually willing to open up a whole lot more about where they fall short in learning to an AI system. And that perhaps presents a unique opportunity, even if I don't know exactly how to operationalize it yet. The second one that I found super interesting was a pilot that was done in one of our courses at EPFL, where it kind of leverages this mantra of you really learn something when you can teach it to somebody else. And what they did here is that they sort of flipped the interaction with the AI agent, where now the student, this was an Algorithms 1 course, the student had to explain to the AI, how a particular algorithm worked, and, do multiple rounds of iteration on this. And then at the end, after, they had thought they had given a perfect explanation, okay, I can understand, that trace, that chat log could be, taken by the professor to try to see how different students were understanding these concepts, what common mistakes were being made. You can also grade them on their understanding if you want in that context, though I don't think that's the best way to do it. But it's a very kind of unique way of using access to these tools as listeners of the students for them to actually see how well they understand this material. I think that's another kind of unique example that I've seen of how we might actually change the human learning process with access to these tools, and it has little to do with how teachers do it.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Yeah, interesting kind of results also in terms of the roles that we didn't think about first when we came to that. Good, I would like to kind of switch over to you if you're ready. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that it all worked out, even with all the delays and everything. Because you haven't been here, all the others kind of have been introduced during the day. I'll just introduce you very quickly. You're an associate professor at the National University of Singapore with research interests, particularly in digital libraries, which I think is very interesting for learning and education. And of course, NLP and information retrieval. You're a member of various kind of...
the normal stuff.
Yeah, all the other stuff. Yes, exactly. Give us your thoughts about possible futures with AI agents in learning.
Okay, so it's Friday, 5 o'clock. Everyone wants to go home. So I thought I would tell a story. Okay? It's 2030. I grew up with GPT-7. I didn't come from a well-to-do background. In fact, I was pretty poor, but I was lucky. In the public library, I got a chance to interact with GPT-7 because there was another person who didn't log off. I got to interact, and I learned how to get the credentials for it. And I helped myself to better my own learning. I mean, my parents were not stable. They always fought, but I always came back to AI to help me learn because it was there. As Antoine said, 24/7, never judged me. That was then. Now it's 2032, and I've progressed, become a student teacher, tutor, my algorithms course. How cool is that, right? Now I'm tutoring other students, and they're using AI, and I'm using AI, right? But the thing is, I look at how the AI is scaffolding the students. It's not always giving the correct answer. It's challenging them, waiting for them to give the answer in their own right, just at the level where the difficulty is hard. Just like level designing in games. Isn't that cool? But then I'm reflecting, I'm a TA. I have to manage all of these students. And the AI could also do more for me, but it doesn't. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, is it scaffolding me? Because I'm a student tutor. I have to report to a professor. The professor is using AI to control me. Where does it end? So, to end my story, human-computer interaction something that we all have to take into a higher order, longer term impact, because it is a societal change. We don't know whether our students are primary school students, secondary school students, pulling out new solutions out of our hats. We don't know whether they're using another AI to answer our AI's questions and get good grades for fails. So that's my story.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Ido, I would like to kind of jump over to you, so I'm switching tables. You talked about the hallucination. Well, I guess maybe that will also feature in your statement about the future. Is that right? Maybe? A little bit.
Sneak it in.
You sneak it in.
It's there at a certain point. I get it.
Let's have your hallucination on LLMs in the future.
So actually, I like your story, and I think part of this, or I should say first, I didn't work on education. I do have a passion to start, and actually the part that I didn't get to at the end of my talk may give me kind of one path inside into that avenues. But I think broadly speaking, maybe the reason why I would like to get more into AI for education is related to kind of Minien's story, that I think that there is a great societal potential in AI. Broadly, like Antoine was talking more about university students, EPFL should be, one of the best universities around. So we're talking about the top. I think kind of in a sense, I think the world right now, or human civilization, suffers from, gaps, increasing gaps, in access to education, both economically, but also with respect to knowledge, skills, and all that. And from that perspective, if AI manages to get into kind of accessible education that people can, both at the individual level as well as more kind of education systems level, it can have a great opportunity. I mean, like the hero of Minien's story. And it's both because it gives us, but I mean, like you mentioned ChatGPT 7, so I'm not sure if it's just ChatGPT 7 as a general LLM, but to get there, we also need to develop better LLM-based educational kind of technologies or platforms, right? Because maybe ChatGPT, both in order to bring into that agent or LLM agent, kind of education agent, both the information, which ChatGPT 7 would not necessarily have in any kind of domain, as well as for teaching methodologies. I don't think, currently LLMs are trained too much on kind of education practices, and maybe as developers we can find ways to put in, teaching methodologies into the abilities of AI agents. And then if both the information and the educational or kind of methodological capabilities will get into LLMs, that can really make education change completely the accessibility of education, to people that don't get enough of it today. And then it, of course, also can empower not just the students, also the teachers. I think this has been mentioned before. So that's a big potential I see. And now I'd like to switch just maybe to an illustration that's related to my own research. So I'll just tell a couple of words about the direction. And that addresses within education the issue that, as was mentioned already, students use LLMs, right? So it's not clear what the student's role was and what the student learns out of it, right? If you let LLMs do the job, we don't learn. And that line of, and I mentioned at the end of my talk, the need in interaction and kind of developing modes of interactions with LLM that are collaborative. We don't just ask LLM and get the answer, but somehow we go through a process that is collaborative for the human and the AI. And I'm working particularly on doing that for co-writing process. So imagine a journalist or an analyst writing a report. How can we build a platform that integrates collaborative writing as we would write with a collaborator or a colleague? How can we write together with an LLM along the entire writing cycle, right? Collecting the information, deciding on the structure, what we want to put in what structure, the actual text generation, verifying the information. That's where, that's also part of the issue. So if we manage to build such platforms, let's say for writing in general, for professional writing, let's say in general, in the education environment, such platforms could also be used by students. Today they use LLMs anyhow, but in kind of in an art type manner with a regular chat. ChatGPT also has this canvas, but this is really minimal. If we put such collaborative systems into education, then it can give more power where, let's say, at least when they write the assignments, the system might trace what they are doing. They might need, in order to see that they really check that everything in the assignment that they submit is correct, we may want them also to make sure that they collect the right attributions, right? And let's say a system or a tutor may actually sample that the information in that essay, let's say written by a student, is correct. Okay, so you can think of things that add an educational layer on top of collaborative processes that people would anyhow develop with AI, but we can make them more efficient. So I think this shows a bit how we can have a potential that doesn't think just about LLMs as they look today, but try to add an educational layer on top of them. Maybe, when students learn, they can keep their privacy, but maybe when they get tested or the process of actually generating an essay, an assignment can be traced in an educational system, and this can work out. I want to say one last challenge. Beyond education, I think into the education system, there is another challenge that was a bit hinted here, but I want to kind of say it more explicitly. And that challenge, not just for education, but broadly. One of the risks of AI is that we lose our capabilities, right? When calculators came out, people nowadays make horrible mistakes, like they might, mistype a zero on the calculator, get a result that's by an order of magnitude difficult, and let's talk about even money, right? And they won't notice. So there is the risk that we as people will lose certain qualities that we don't want to lose, and maybe through education we somehow can train people, to still maintain them and in a collaborative way with the LLMs.
Okay, thank you so much. Preslav, I would like to, last but not least, hand over to you. Your research focus on factuality, I guess, has something to do with education too.
Yep. So, I want the points have been made so far, so I don't think it goes super long because I also want to get a lot of enough time for discussion. But high level. First of all, it's a technology that we cannot stop. It's gonna stay. It's gonna be around, and it's a disruptive technology. It's similar, to the. I haven't talked about the three revolutions in information production, but it's also kind of has aspects relate to education, right? So kind of when now when everybody is a good writer, right? Okay. The question is what is left. We haven't talked about the calculator, right? So okay, I studied in the math school, okay, and there are different perspectives there. Okay, so one perspective was that the first thing was that the calculator was forbidden in the classroom. Where a math school calculator cannot be used in the math school, because that's a basic skill, that's by definition, right? But still, that being said, when we are trying to solve a problem, what we are being great on? Well, we have many intermediate steps. It's not just the right answer. Again and again, you express as a formula, and maybe you calculate the actual number to show that you can do it without a calculator, but actually what really matters and where most points are actually to come up with this thing, and we have the intermediate steps that are necessary. So now what we need to do here is, one thing that we need to understand is that the language models, right? I can talk about this halo effect. They are very, very good in certain things. In fact, in many aspects, they are better than the best humans. But when is this? Well, in the frequent cases, okay? And it's something that you need to understand. This kind of has aspects that we need to teach people. Kind of, there's a need, this was mentioned before, we need to have AI literacy. When ChatGPT came, there was a lawyer that came up there with, precedence cases. Okay, this case is similar to this other case, and therefore blah blah blah. And then this was all hallucinated, right? So what happened was that he still thought it was a search engine, right? Kind of case. So now we need to educate the society, right? What this is. The same thing happened before with the fake news. What happened? Well, actually, all this fact-checking effort, has been quite helpful. And to me, the main thing is not that they have fact-checked this specific claim. It's because they have educated the society that, there's a transformative technology. Don't trust every single thing. Just like, in the past, trust the radio, trust the TV. Okay, there can be biases in this and that, occasional mistakes, there can be manipulation, but still, they are clear editorial guidelines. They control their professionals there, right? And when social media can, this is all removed. Now we have the LLMs, is the same kind of thing. So kind of we need to teach media literacy. Kind of media literacy is now AI literacy, and that's something that actually many countries started doing. So for example, in the United Arab Emirates recently has been passed a kind of major change in the educational system. So AI is going to be taught from the kindergarten all the way in every kind of level of school. This doesn't mean that everybody is going to become a Python programmer, but this means that we are going to understand what this technology is. And then it cannot do everything. So for example, in Sofia, there was a construction building, and somebody put a title there saying, ChatGPT, can you please finish this building for me? Right? So we need to understand what they can do, they cannot do. They are not going to transform every single thing. In fact, there's a very interesting technology that's going to affect, those kind of workers, the brain workers that are left out of previous transformations. This is what is unique about this transformation. It's going to, and then the educational system. Educational system is a very, very traditional system, and it's a good thing, okay? But, it is going to evolve. And I started with one very, very important aspect, okay? So when it came to calculator, what we are tested on, not whether you get the right number, but whether you have the right thought process, okay? Now we need to do the same thing, okay? So again, I started that LLMs can be really, really good in certain situations, but not so good in others, okay? And why can they be very, very good? Well, because they care, let's say, about medical diagnosis, about any single thing. The typical case, they have seen many more than any human being, right? And they can really, really be good there. But the thing is, it's a very, very long tail. If you take a self-driving car, right? You take it in a known situation, like maybe out of the road, maybe it has absolutely no way to get back on the road because it has never seen this situation, has no idea what to do. But humans are more intelligent. We need to teach people this kind of intelligence, right? Then, how can we use this? Okay, I'm also, generating tests and all that, but so we need to we need to do a combination of two things. One is we need to be able to put the people in a situation where you don't have these two available, so that those skills are still there. For example, I don't do when multiple choice tests. I'm not sure they're a good idea anymore. Homeworks. It's not clear. I believe in class think. Written answer, so that you really see the people's thinking. But at the same time, they are great too. We are not really throwing out the calculators. So we are going to, maybe to finish. It's going to transform. It is transforming society. It's going to transform the society faster than the education system. Education system has to adapt. And certain countries actually are adapting faster. So, for example, in United Arab Emirates, we have this in all levels. But really, we have a very serious commitment to AI. We have a Ministry of AI, okay, and we have a University of AI, and we have now AI in all levels of the education system. And then we are building several of those very large language models. And actually, according to the AI index, the country is ranked number 5 in the world. So really kind of, you need to, we are taking in the United Arab Emirates really an approach where we're embracing those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks all of you for your statements quickly. I really appreciated how you, in the beginning, kind of emphasized the process over the outcome, which is where the learning might be happening, not just so much in the outcome. I want to pick up on something that featured in a lot of your statements, which is sort of like the access. And we said, like, all of them are doing it, but it's also a great opportunity because it's 24/7 in the library, available in privacy. And I think there's a lot of like aspects like this featured in your statements. And I want to maybe critically piggyback on that a little bit in terms of like, how is that going to play out? Is that going to be as fair and just as we imagine it to be? I mean, I remember the internet was once kind of touted as something that will become the playing field for everybody on equal eye level, but it turned out not to be, right? It turned out to be dominated by a few, and with that came something that you said in your talk about. It's a very normalizing effect, right? Also in terms of like LLMs are not as culturally aware as people, because there's a lot more, particularly US context that they are trained on. So one thing is how do we actually ensure that this technology really has this kind of equity to it and equal and just access to it, and also not this kind of overly normalized way of learning, because I think we don't everybody want to learn in the same way, even not just the same things, but also not in the same way, right? So maybe if any of you can have some thoughts about that on this section. I'm just looking at you.
I feel the pressure. So, I mean, I think one thing I would say, the first thing that I would say about that topic in LLMs is that I think LLMs are an opportunity for some of the most unnormalized learning imaginable. Even if we may view LLMs as kind of these monolithic blocks that say the same thing all the time to all users, the interaction schemes that different students can have with them essentially would allow them to personalize learning experiences in ways that might be more beneficial to them. I guess the second point to that, though, is something referred to as well as, I guess, the quality of that education. It may not necessarily, I guess, seem this way, but I think there is potentially, as we think about how education has progressed, at least the perception of an accessibility quality trade-off. Whereas you make education more, accessible to more folks, with LLMs being kind of the furthest, manifestation of that on the spectrum. As Preslav mentioned, you end up with these factuality challenges, and Ido mentioned hallucination challenges, which is you don't actually know if what the LLM is saying to you is correct, and maybe it is, maybe it is not. It has these issues. The thing is that I think this is a bit of a fallacy, because it's also true with people. Ultimately, it's a trust in the educator, whether it's the LLM or the professor. Plato was mentioned, 3,000 years ago. He was, I guess, viewed as the ultimate authority on subjects on which he lectured, but, maybe he was wrong about half the stuff he taught, because, we've learned quite a bit since then. This is an example of a professor, I think at MIT, who starts off lectures by kind of, stacking 6 or so physics textbooks on a desk, from different decades throughout the 20th century, and kind of describing in each of them what was true then, that was taught then, that is today known to be completely false. So, there's also factuality challenges and the teachers that we have today as well. So maybe at the end of the day, it's, LLMs and, other sources of knowledge can be just as reliable teachers as people in many settings, and, might actually be great tools of accessibility that don't necessarily have the same challenges that humans do.
It's kind of like as good as people, kind of open up a whole host of ethical problems in the sense like there's a difference between people being wrong and LLMs being wrong. We know.
Absolutely, but you know, I'm fine with folks here disagreeing with me on that point as well. But I do think there's oftentimes when we think about the shortcomings of LLMs as educators, we miss the fact that there's also lots of shortcomings to humans as educators as well.
So I think kind of okay. So let me kind of go back a little bit on the chart to think. So what would you think of a person that always knows everything? Well, I mean, basically, well, this is kind of how people, kind of experienced people in business recognize whom they can trust and whom they cannot. Okay, so a real expert is going to tell from time to time, I don't know. Okay, an LLM never does that. It always knows everything, right? And obviously, it cannot also possibly know everything. Now the problem is you don't know when you can trust it, you cannot. Okay, the problem is not that those models hallucinate. The problem is that they don't tell you, and they don't. You have no clue when you can actually kind of trust them or not. It is kind of what I was giving Mike in my talk, and you have this, let's say, trying to look into the internal parameters. Maybe kind of we need to train it in a little bit different way. But that's kind of one thing, right? And in the education system, we need to teach people to understand that, look, you cannot just because it's very confident and very convincing doesn't mean that this is true. And that's kind of language models, but also kind of, we need to teach students that it's true also of people. It's also true of society. Because you are going to get many more things that are generated in this way, very, very convincing things. Now, the real human intelligence should be, okay, I'm reading this. Doesn't matter whether it's written by a human or not. Kind of, can I trust it, can I not? And then the other thing is, teaching people to be what actually, real experts in good scientists are. Okay, so I have been kind of monitoring myself in some point, in some talk. How many times I said I don't know? I'm like, wow. Okay, from kind of Professor I am, yeah. But that's kind of honesty, right? And then we need to be experts and to say, look, this I understand. I can tell you. Here, if you want, I can give you an educated guess. But I need to be honest and say this is an educated guess. I don't know, right? That's not my area.
So really,
and that's something that we need to teach students.
So maybe the main challenge here for LLMs in education is not so much making LLMs better in the sense of more factual, but actually designing the interaction in a way so that pupils or people have the right role in mind when they interact with it. Right? And that might be not just educating people, but also designing the interaction with LLMs in a particular way so that that becomes obvious. Because you said, I think you also had it in your talk, the way LLMs present their answers, right? They suggest this all-knowing kind of capacity.
So I think that we should be also working on the LLMs, right? And we should try to make them more factual, but also kind of make them more explicit to say, kind of to make more explicit their limitations. But at the same time, kind of like teaching students, those tools have those limitations. And then at the end of the day, I think there are other things like moral and ethical that we need to teach students because those are typically in conflict to achieving some other goals and other objectives, and this is kind of already evolving, right? And we hear like many, stories by journalists. Oh yeah, the model kind of now found a way to cheat in this specific way because kind of it told it can achieve a different goal.
Sorry.
So I sit on the ACL ethics committee, and you'd think I'd be a pessimist, but I'm an optimist. I think AI is getting a lot better. I think we as a community are putting in a lot of effort to make it better, and we need to sustain that effort. We have to say ethics, equity, these things are not finished at all. They're barely started. But when we make those things published and we put them out there transparently, they do get into models. We can't see that, of course, on the open source side or on the the light side, right? But the closed source model, they do put these things in and then we react to them. So one of the things I've told people in my faculty, in other faculties at NUS about is that you cannot view large language models as points in a space. They are vectors of acceleration and velocity. What does that mean? It means that the state that you are looking at right now, and you're saying LLMs cannot do that. 6 months from now, 2 years from now, they'll be able to do that. Okay? Why? Because everyone in this room is making that progress visible. Okay? And then people outside of this room, maybe some of us in this room in industry, are taking those outputs and putting them into our models. Okay? What I think we need to do is keep on working towards a long-term goal, which I alluded to in my talk, is that I think one of the big things that we've been observing in Asia, especially in Singapore, is this bimodal distribution with respect to AI, right? All of us in this room, we can channel AI to be more productive, right? It enhances our capability. But there are plenty of people that will use it in a way to subvert the learning process, right? And they're going to end up much worse for the wear, right? Because there's no scaffold, there's no safeguards to prevent them from misusing AI in a way that we didn't want them to use it as an educator. Yeah.
Yeah, note on misusing or what you were saying about the role of these models. We also have to take care that we speak in the right way about LLMs. You criticized the term hallucination. I think it's a very bad metaphor. Humans hallucinate when they take drugs or something. LLMs don't do this. LLMs themselves use the first person pronoun I, which is very bad. They should use something else. Whatever, say ChatGPT all the time instead of the first person pronoun. So there's this anthropomorphism in there, which is very bad. And I think we should, whatever, through this committee or whatever, make an effort to use a different kind of language.
Maybe I want to add something. So I think it's very important when it comes to education. We haven't talked about what AI literacy is, right? That's important, what this technology is. But I think that part of this education is what are these models, how they are trained. If people understand that, there's no, there's no really kind of agency, there's not really kind of there's not really a person there. I mean, this next kind of word prediction, there's kind of some instruction tuning and this and that kind of, we need to kind of understand those mechanisms. That's one. The second thing is that in that respect, it's really, really important. And now we are in a very unique position that, interestingly, we are still kind of, initially people thought that, okay, there's going to be one LLM to rule them all, and we are not in this situation. Actually, in fact, we have quite a few. That's number one. Which I think is a positive development. But even more positive development is that this time, compared to some other evolutions, the research community has a big say. Even though kind of those methods require a lot of resources in terms of compute, in terms of data, still kind of there are many different countries, they're kind of outside of the industry, and there are kind of also some relatively smaller models compared by industry standards that are still kind of quite performant, that can be built and developed in academia. Of course, not everybody is rich enough to have big models, but we can all contribute to things that are truly open, that can be very well studied. And actually, we have been building those models. We have the LM360 initiative, where we have been building truly transparent models. What do you mean by that? Not just open weights, because people talk about open source. They are not open source. Where is the source of ChatGPT? Has anybody seen it? No. They are open weights. Okay, not even ChatGPT, let's say one or whatever. So okay, they are open weights, but we are also kind of have models that are open data, open code, open experiments, and we have even every single checkpoint of every single experiment released. That's LM360, because we have 360 checkpoints. It's something extremely popular, and there are kind of others that are doing similar things, and we have kind of the our Institute for AI is doing this. We have heard about plans for this and stuff in other places, and Antoine has been talking about their plan to release models in this way, and it's different. And I can tell you how it's different. Different is kind of when search engines were there, right? In fact, when I did my PhD thesis on using the web as a corpus to solve different kinds of syntactic and semantic ambiguities, in a way, it's like using the web as an LLM, right? Except they are kind of not LLMs, right? So the really kind of doing web scale thing. But at that time, who could do it? Just a few companies. But now, kind of, we as scientists can do it. You're having like a lot of talk about let's do a search engine built by scientists. Could not be done. But now we have LLMs, and we should actually kind of teach people not necessarily to build their own one. Okay, I have colleagues who is saying, oh yeah, my boss, is buying like a couple of $1,000 cards, and kind of whatever hardware is not compatible, but he wants to build models to do this and to revolutionize whatever. We cannot do it with this, right? We have what they are, how they are built, so that you can understand every aspect, so that we can study them, and so that we can kind of design them in a better way.
So this openness will help the research community to kind of make the case of finding the right role.
Society.
Well, yeah. I mean, somebody has to kind of properly explore and show different possibilities in terms of roles, right? And that's probably a duty that the research community has in that sense. And I quite like what you said about the language also that we use to talk about these LLMs. NLSF uses this word of cognitively impenetrable manipulation, where you say like, even though we know that they're machines, we sort of cannot help but anthropomorphize them in a sense that is not helpful in our relationship to them. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area. I want to make sure that at least we open up the floor a little bit. So whenever you feel like you have something that you would like to ask the panel, please just raise your hand. And, there's a question back there. I'm running into the camera.
Hello, thanks a lot for the great discussions, and I feel very excited that we are in the area of AI. But now, I guess, now we have been discussing a lot, but our opinions are mostly positive, because mostly positive because we are computer scientists. But I guess the opinion is a bit biased. But maybe I'm not the right person to bring up this question, but I was trying to say that, for example, now it's better. Now AI getting better and better, whereas, for example, the AI in the future may produce factual information, and AI maybe can translate perfect literary translation, and AI will not hallucinate. But for example, in the next 10 years, 10 years or 20 years, then you see, for example, the students will less have demotivated students, for example, to study translation, demotivated student to learn programming. Then if this happens, then AI or the superintelligence will indeed become a threat to the human literacy. Or do you have the comments on, for example, prevent this from happening, or like protect human literacy, or even improve human literacy in the age of AI? Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'll just keep it very short. So I think one of the key things that we need to look forward is thinking about teaching as a form of educating self-efficacy. Right? Efficacy is the ability to change the environment that you're in, have agency. I think all of us in this room have that. But when people are affected by experts that are way smarter than them, they may lose this self-efficacy. They may find that they don't have a value anymore. I think it's very important that we study how we are going to do that. Part of it will be scaffolding, right? LLMs, as I alluded to in my opening statement, will learn how to deal with social niceties, like holding back information in a way that's benefiting the party. right? And making sure that's still on the guardrails to make sure, say, a primary one student or elementary school student will be able to use these tools because they're going to use them, right? Whether you want to use them or not, they're going to be there, right? To make sure that those guards are still there, right? Because we see this all the time with our own selves, right? We don't want our children to be on screens all day long, right? We know that's bad for them. But there's always this divide, right? Where certain parents, they don't have a choice. They have to work very long hours. They have no choice but to feed the kid the screen for, 6 hours a day. Is that really fair to them, right? On the flip side of that, I heard one public policy professor tell me, and you're always concerned about ethics, but did you know, where I come from in South Africa, there are villages that don't have access to doctors. But guess what? They have access to ChatGPT. I don't care whether it hallucinates 1 out of 100 times. If it gives 99 times advice that's good, I've saved so many more lives. The loss function is very clear. It's either you die or you get some treatment, even if it's not correct. Okay? Which one do you want to be on? So there are flip sides of both of these coins.
These are really hard ethical concerns, of course. Please go ahead.
At the end, you said you spoke about the translators who may lose their jobs. I think that's just how technology evolves. Whatever, 50 years ago, the printing industry was in a big disarray because new techniques were developed, jobs got lost, books were still printed, so this was fine. Many translators will lose their jobs, but the next generation will learn something different. Maybe the top translators will stay, but like the menial work will be done by AI programs. I think that's fine. Technology evolves.
And I think that has to do with the self-efficacy point that you just made, right? And there are certain ways in which humans want to stay human by being able to learn and affect their own lives to change to the circumstances and the tools that are in the world in that sense, right? Is there anyone else who wants to respond to that? Or is there any other question? Or there's a question back. Let's try and get more.
Thank you. So, as an NLP researcher, what are the sorry, hi, great panel, everyone. So, as an NLP researcher, I wanted to ask what are the current open problems do you think that we can work on to make our models more better integrated to the education system? It has to be from both sides. So what are the NLP side here?
So maybe I can just say something about personalization. I think we mentioned personalization in like 2 questions before, right? So basically, I guess in order to we know this kind of like a personalized learning is super important, right? So there wouldn't be like one size fits all kind of solution for everyone, right? So in terms of learning, obviously, like you would expect the AI system to be able to produce something which tailor to this particular student's kind of capability level, and also consider these students past kind of a learning trajectory. And I think this is a very active research area currently in NLP and also in LLM research. So there has been work actually focusing on this personalized LLM because you can imagine this personalization not just in education, right? So personalization can also be used in many other domains as well. So for example, in healthcare, you also want to have this personalized treatment, right? So but then I guess the kind of mainstream solution nowadays is still kind of try to have some like an individualized LoRa component. So you have some LLM already trained on some population data, but then you have some specific user data, and then you want to just train this user specific LoRa. Obviously, I mean this is not kind of a basically I mean this kind of like a solution has a problem, right? Because the one thing is that we have a very scarce user data, right? So we don't have a sufficient user data to actually train to say individualized LoRa component. So that's why I think there's some kind of like a middle ground in between. So rather than like you have this user-specific LoRa component, maybe you can go for kind of a group level LoRa component, right? You can group similar user together. But then going beyond this kind of training, so perhaps like we could also look into test time personalization. So I think that's still like some kind of new avenues for us to do something in this space. So there's a lot of interesting kind of research direction challenges we can address to develop personalized LLMs.
Thank you. We've one more question back here.
Hello. Sorry if I come off as a bit of a pessimist or anything. You talked about when talking about AI systems in the future. You talked about equity and scaffolding to society. Isn't the sustainability, the green part, also like very important thing? Like the increasing energy cost that AI, especially LLMs and generative AI uses, and also because they are growing at such a rate, the kinds of electricity that they use is also not very green, or so that is one aspect. The second aspect, second subpart is that shouldn't we look at where do we want, I think this is kind of utopian again, but like where do you want our society to go, and see what kind of AI is going to help us with that, rather than asking the question, how fast can we grow AI and how better we can make AI? Like it's a tool to a better future for us, right? It's not a tool for it's not an end in itself. AI is not the, yeah. So that's the question. Sorry.
I mean, both of those are tough questions. I guess my short answer to the second one, and maybe the fact that I spent a lot of time in the US comes across here, is that in terms of the utopia goal, I think generally the 20th century showed that top-down planning of society is a bit less optimal than bottom-up planning of society. Essentially, you don't necessarily get great outcomes when you try to intervene at a very high level. And maybe the same story will be true with AI, and that's generally what I believe in the context of education at the very least. That generally, what education will look like in 5 years or 10 years or further is going to be driven. The major disruptions will be driven more by students and how they learn to interact with the systems, as opposed to how teachers end up integrating them. So I think that the bottom-up story will generally be true across most areas of society. As for the green question, I mean, the energy consumption of these systems is definitely an open challenge. What I often say here is that it's important to view it from the perspective of the entire pipeline, and from how you actually source the energy that is being used to power the data center, that is being used to deploy the model that the user is interacting with. There's so many different places in which you can try, to be more sustainable. Make it that the systems use less tokens, for example, when responding to users. Make it that in general, the prompts make it the responses more terse. Make the models smaller themselves. Find a way to use pruning or distillation or quantization to essentially require less computation for each prediction. To coming up with new custom hardware that can deploy them, faster. One of the things or algorithms as well. One of the things that's fun about training LLMs is that you find out that only around 45% of the compute is actually being used. Unfortunately, 100% of the energy of running the chip is actually being used because you have to pay for full consumption, which naturally means where does that energy come from in the first place? And so you can have interventions at each of these points. And in my experience, the most impactful one is the lowest level one, which is what type of energy do you actually use to power the data center? That's where you can have the biggest impact, because if you generally have a clean energy mixture there, then that propagates downstream. If you generally have a lower contamination rate with dirty energy sources right there.
And maybe just for the first point that you raised as well, the field of science and technology studies for years has made this point that tools and humans kind of sort of like mutually shape each other as we kind of design tools. Tools make us back. And probably the question is what kind of tools do we want to invent to make us which kinds of humans? And that's going to be a question that is equally true for LLMs. I want to take in one more question here before we have to end on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So my question, this is something I heard in a talk, TEDx talk. So humans are wired to choose the easiest option available. So I know eating healthy is good for my health, but when I'm tired after working long hours, I choose the food delivery app to eat the food which is not healthy for me. And it's shown in research that the rise of usage of these food delivery apps leads to physical obesity, increase in physical obesity among people. So the use of LLMs for outsourcing, for thinking processes, leads to an equivalent of physical obesity, that is mental obesity in humans, can lead to. And I have experienced this a little bit, because we tend to depend so much on LLMs for the brainstorming process, for everything, because they know everything and they're better at it. So this is a very major concern, if we may raise a generation which is mentally obese and they're not healthy mentally, if I'm able to put my question correctly.
Again, I come back to the point of self-efficacy, which is that we have to really think about what our education is trying to do, right? We're not trying to seek answers, we're trying to seek questions. We want our students to be skeptical, question, and to always think what's right for them, even though it's challenging. And we do that as teachers a lot, right? We challenge our students to think more broadly about the questions that they ask or about research, right? But there is always this danger, right, that students will take an easy way out. The key point, I think, is to make sure that as educators, we get to the point where our students are challenged enough and they don't rely on those tools, right? We have to put the scaffold there, right? Because if we don't say, oh, you can't use calculators if you're under 6th grade or something like that, right? Then of course they'll use it, right? Then they won't know, like we said before, like whether they've converted their units properly and they put in a magnitude off, or they've converted imperial units to metric units and have airplanes fall out of the sky, things like that, right? Those types of problems will happen as a result of that. So making sure we can scaffold is, I think, a really big problem. And we have this difficulty that a lot of us are focused on the technical aspect, but not the social aspect. So we need to call for more integration between social scientists who know how this technology is being used in the field, in vivo, where we have to acknowledge that study needs to be done in concert.
And I also want to kind of maybe push back a little bit on that point of humans try to not learn, because I think that's not what we see in the smallest of humans. There's an inbuilt curiosity, and it's more the system of education that kind of tries to get rid of that. And in that sense, Ellen, when you said the system is not changing as fast as we learn, and the technology on the ground, in that sense, probably we need to kind of also think about the educational system that makes us mentally obese, to kind of stay with your phrasing. And it's not, I think, learning is a human trait as much as moving is a human trait. And it's the environment that we create that makes us not do that. And that's probably kind of what you say, it's getting the scaffolding right? Okay, for a final statement.
Maybe again, I want to go back to something that I was also mentioning in my talk, right? And kind of also mentioned here up to the also kind of mentioned through the discussion, right? So, well, we need to. Okay, so when you do fact checking, what do you do? Kind of a good way to do. Kind of there was a question before. I kind of want to go back to that previous to another question. The question was, what can we do as researchers, let's say, in machine learning, right, to help the education system? Okay, that is a good question. Again, to answer this question, we need to work with people from the education system, what they actually need. Because in fact checking, everybody went there, okay, let's fact check whether it is true or false. Maybe that's important, that's interesting for society, but it's definitely not what the fact checkers want, right? Just like when it comes to machine translation, kind of human translators, there are better ways to do translation, there are kind of translation memories that are specifically designed for the purpose. So we need systems that are specifically designed for specific use case. And education is a very broad term. There are many different aspects that we can work on. And we are part of the education system, so we understand, but we also only understand it partially because we're in the university education. We need to talk to experts, right, from the other parts of the education, so we can design things together with them.
Yeah.
And they are not phasing. I mean, it is not the first time that there is an education kind of technological development that is kind of putting the danger that students can actually kind of become lazy and take a shortcut. The calculator was another one, and there have been ways around it. So we're able to invent ways now as well.
Do you want to have the last word?
The last word, and
Make it count. No pressure.
yes, just related to the last question, which I think is a great question, and I also referred to it earlier. There is a risk that LLMs will deteriorate our capacities, but maybe part of the answer is something that I think Yulan made mention before, that with every technology, right, some professions become obsolete, right, because there's technology that can do the job. But on the other hand, as Preslav mentioned, right, LLMs, we know they also have limitations, and there are aspects in which they are not good. So if we keep teaching and asking our students to perform tasks that now LLMs can do, then we might get into this mental obesity. So maybe it's everything speculations. I mean, truth is, we're 6, 7 more respectful people here, and we don't know really, right, what's going to happen. Not more than you, just we are better in maybe stating opinions and predictions.
We have a mic.
Than you are. But this is manual. You see, no one needs. Only I control that. But I mean, maybe the challenge, is to find, what are really the tasks, what are the translation regimes, that LLM cannot do, right, because maybe it requires more social, more human skills, what are I don't know, the legal cases, for which you still need somehow the sensibility of a human. So in a sense, we need to realize, and it's hard now, because LLMs grow up so fast, and it's not clear what they can and what they cannot do. With prior revolutions, maybe it was clear what they cannot do, and kind of humanity shifted to the things, move people to the areas beyond the technology's scope. So possibly we need to do something similar here and start shifting what we expect for humans to do, given that LLMs can do many of the things in which humans got engaged before. And then, if you get to these regimes, then you won't cause obesity because you'll be targeting goals that LLMs cannot do. Maybe that's part of the answer.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to end at this point. Please join me thanking the panel for their time and insights.